What does the fate of action movies look like in Hollywood? I've become increasingly concerned about the future of action movies this last year, and I'd like to talk a bit in this video about how we got here and what we can expect from the future of action movies on the big screen. It feels like the studios are always on the race to the next billion-dollar movie. Ever since the pandemic, only a few movies have managed to pass that billion-dollar milestone, including Top Gun Maverick, Avatar: The Way of Water, Spider-Man: No Way Home, and Barbie. Unfortunately, a lot of audiences are very selective since the pandemic about which movies they're going to go watch in theaters, and often that amounts to if it's a franchise that they're aware of. And that makes it a lot harder for original movies to make waves with audiences who aren't film lovers like myself. I'm going to be criticizing the state of modern action movies a lot in this video, but it's only because I love action movies so much. There's a reason I started to go to the movies when I was 10, 11, 12 so often. You even see this Captain America shirt I got on here. I'm a big fan of them, but that's why I'm so passionate about arguing how Hollywood can make the state of action movies richer and more exciting today. I've become very disillusioned with the $200 million IP approach that we see with a lot of big action movies these days. It seems like franchise film continuation has become synonymous with crowd pleaser, and that kind of makes me sad because I don't think whether a movie came before something or has a similar keyword in the title to a movie we've already seen should define how watchable or accessible it is. Unfortunately, studios are often only embracing that familiarity because that's what audiences flock to these days. So they're looking to greenlight things as long as they have those key words, whether it's Batman, Godzilla, Planet of the Apes, etc. And that's how every franchise continues to get another sequel, reboot, or spin-off. A lot of these big action movies this year, again, have reached almost $200 million in their budget. They're often based on some franchise that's been around since the 70s or 80s. They're filled with CGI, nostalgia, references to things people are familiar with in their music or their characters or their tone. And often they tend to feel the same. Particularly movies like Godzilla and Kong the New Empire and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, these movies that are sort of doing the same thing as their predecessor again because that movie made money, with a lot of CGI just being overused in these action movies again and again. Like I said, the 70s, 80s, 90s nostalgia is something people are really tired of too, and I feel like they just tend to have less to say these days. I feel like a lot of franchises that are still blurting out movies this year, often the conversation comes of why did they make another one? Why is there another Planet of the Apes? Why is there another Kung Fu Panda? Etc. So if I'm looking at a franchise that I liked at one point, but they're just spewing out movies without any more exciting stuff to say in the story or reinventing its tone in any way, that just takes away a lot from the excitement of the theater experience. So lately I've been drawn to these more original action movies like Monkey Man, directed by Dev Patel, which only cost $10 million to make, or The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which was directed by Guy Ritchie, or Civil War, which is directed by Alex Garland, who's such a brilliant director. I've loved everything that he's directed so far. The Fall Guy is technically based on a TV show, but it's not drawing from some sort of massive fan base or some sort of past theater experience that people are familiar with. What are the differences between some of the movies that I mentioned versus some of these safer bet franchise films that have come out and made a lot of money this year? First of all, let's talk about why they were greenlit. These movies like Monkey Man and Civil War were greenlit because they are script and director driven. They were created by a team of a director, writers, producers from the ground up, letting them create their own tone, their own story, kill off whatever characters they want, take risks with their action scenes, or try to draw inspiration or create at their own will. On the other hand, a movie like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes or Bad Boys 4 was greenlit because their predecessors made a lot of money. That way they were sure bets to put butts in seats. Another difference is that I feel like these original movies have something more to say. You go in and you genuinely have no idea what's gonna play out. You don't know what plot elements are gonna be thrown in. You don't know what tonal or music or stylistic choices are going to be incorporated. Often I feel like the defense these days of these big mindless CGI action movies is that you have to turn your brain off to enjoy them. But I'm kind of tired of that. Even a movie like Roadhouse, everyone was like, oh, I like the punching and stuff. And I was like, nah, that was kind of dumb.
People seem a little aggressive around here.
And the last difference is that they are low risk. Again, when you're a director coming in to a franchise that's already existed, you're expected to use filmmaking elements that were already utilized and established by a different filmmaker in a previous installment, because that film has a fan base. So how much control does a director really have in a franchise film versus the producers? This isn't for every single franchise, but it's a trend that I've noticed in a lot of recent franchises, like Ghostbusters, for example. This doesn't go for every single franchise film. I'm not saying Matt Reeves didn't have a lot of creative freedom when it comes to the style of the Batman, or James Gunn didn't use any creativity with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I'm just saying it often is the case in franchise films that the producer gets the final say. Nia DaCosta even said this when she worked on the Marvels, that she felt like she was going in making a Kevin Feige movie first, so she had to manage her expectations. Why does this change need to happen? I feel like action movies and these big sci-fi fantasy blockbusters have really grown over the years, and I feel like the culmination of how big a movie can get probably came with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, movies like that. But now every movie is trying to come up with the biggest CGI setting or the biggest cast of characters to manage. And like Syndrome so wisely said in The Incredibles, when everything is Endgame, nothing is Endgame. And franchise fatigue is very real. I'm kind of sick of having to jog my memory of the events of a couple movies every time I'm going to see an exciting tentpole film. And this isn't me criticizing every single franchise film. There are franchise movies that I really enjoy. There are some that even make my top of the year list. For example, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 or Across the Spider-Verse were brilliant movies last year. Dune Part 2 is my favorite movie of the year so far, and I don't see that changing, at least for a while. This is more me criticizing the studio's model of capitalizing on IPs only and trying to only invest in these $100+ million movies rather than have a balance of exciting new releases that are put a lot of money and scale into and the exciting sequels. The problem is that original movies haven't been doing great at the box office when they're of this scale. The Creator, for example, is one of my favorite action movies of the last year. Unfortunately, it only made $100 million compared to its $80 million budget. And really the only explanation for that today is not bad reviews because the reviews were good, or bad marketing. Disney spent a lot of money in marketing this film, basically everywhere. The only excuse now is that it's not based on some familiar IP, and that one element that contributes to a movie failing at the box office can probably also be replicated when talking about almost any movie that's failed at the box office these last couple years, and in the next couple years too. Another example is Argylle, a movie that had a huge cast including Henry Cavill, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, Bryan Cranston, Samuel L. Jackson, John Cena. The word of mouth was not great, but I would like to see more movies like this greenlit, not because I would defend it, but because Matthew Vaughn really gets creative control when he's making a movie, and you feel it. Even though this one wasn't very good, I do wish more people had seen it because I like seeing when non-IP movies succeed and get great word of mouth. There have been some exceptions to this, Bullet Train being the most recognizable. It made over $200 million at the box office and was considered a massive success. So far, they haven't been turning it into a franchise, which is nice to have just a great, successful standalone movie, but I really do enjoy Bullet Train. The cast is big, the action is creative and humorous, the visual style is really nice, and it's just balls to the wall funny. And Everything Everywhere All at Once and Civil War, I believe both cost $30 million or less to make, and both have made over $100 million. Both have generated great word of mouth from critics and audiences. Everything Everywhere All at Once was even an Oscar darling, and I feel like A24, ironically, has been the studio that's been doing it right when it comes to original action movies. And I feel like studios can take some advice from what A24 has been doing. Which brings me to my big point of this episode. Moving forward, in order to secure an exciting and fun and awesome fate for action movies that isn't just tiring, I think that studios need to bring back the mid-budget movie. When he won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, Cord Jefferson said this:
$200 million movies are also a risk, you know, and it doesn't always work out, but you take the risk anyway. And instead of making one $200 million movie, try making 20 $10 million movies.
And I very much agree. Studios need to stop chasing that next Avengers Endgame, that next Avatar: The Way of Water, that next Top Gun Maverick and try to make more lower budget or mid-budget films, even a couple action movies that cost $30 or $40 million, and then let the word of mouth generate some box office numbers. Even if that only ends up being $200 million, that could end up generating new franchises that aren't the same thing. Star Wars, again, started in the 1970s. Ghostbusters started in the 1980s. Godzilla started in the 40s. So it's sometimes cool to see when new franchises start based on one mid-budget movie generating great word of mouth, like when the first John Wick movie did that in 2014, or A Quiet Place in 2018, or my favorite new franchise being Knives Out, which only started in 2019. I think studios need to redefine what a box office success looks like and let their successes grow organically, even if that means trading one movie that makes $500 to $800 million to a couple movies that make $100 or $200 million. And who knows, maybe that'll generate a franchise that a couple movies down the line can make $1 billion. And look at what happened with Oppenheimer, which isn't even an action movie. It made almost $1 billion just by great reviews and word of mouth. Not every filmmaker needs to be Christopher Nolan, and Nolan is probably the last director today whose name being credited as the director guarantees box office success. But look, every filmmaker has come from humble beginnings. And what happens when Spielberg and Nolan and Scorsese stop making big movies like that? Studios just have to have a little bit of faith. Last thing I do want to talk about that concerns me a little bit, I was expecting The Fall Guy to be a massive success to start off the summer. It's got 2 A-list actors, was marketed as an accessible action comedy, it's directed by a reliable filmmaker, David Leitch, who's behind successes like Atomic Blonde, Deadpool 2, Hobbs & Shaw, Bullet Train. So the fact that it's been falling really below box office expectations just because it's not some recognizable franchise makes me a little bit concerned about audiences today being lenient towards anything that's not recognizable or a sequel to a really successful movie. But again, I do have faith that movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Civil War can come from humble mid-budget beginnings and then generate that organic word of mouth. But Furiosa's even bombing so far, and it's a sequel to a movie that's considered one of the best movies of the 2010s, won 6 Oscars. You ask anyone, they probably love Mad Max Fury Road. So why is Furiosa bombing too? And I don't think it's the R rating. Movies like Deadpool and Joker have shown us that R-rated movies can still be really successful. It's got 2 big actors in Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth, and it's part of a long-running franchise that people are familiar with. And I feel like Furiosa is a franchise action movie doing everything right. It lets its length breathe. It's not throwing that Marvel comedy at you all the time. It's investing in a beautiful visual look and rich world building that takes intellect to follow. And they took their time with it. They waited 9 years after Fury Road to release this movie. So I feel like the more Furiosa's failure gets blamed on stuff like taking its time, or having intellect, or investing in a rich, patient visual look. I feel like the more those things end up getting attributed to its box office failure, the less intelligent blockbusters we're gonna end up getting. And I'm really afraid that that massive success of Dune Part 2, with its patient pace and its rich world building and trusting in its audiences to be smart, I'm afraid that all of that is going to end up being seen as an anomaly. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think studios need to change? Where do you see the fate of action movies going? What action movies do you think have stood out among the rest these last couple years? And which action movies are you most excited for in the near future? Make sure to follow me here and on my Instagram, Film Toppings, where I'm most active, and stay tuned for more videos like this about movies, television, Hollywood, and everything that's on my mind.